was a very accomplished sports car driver, but he'd also done Formula One a few times, and he great guy, never had the money to get where he was going. But so during the first heat of the Macau event, he was leading, and the way the track was set out, the first corner used to be the Lisboa Corner, and so you've got a very, very wide straight all the way down, and then it narrows up as it goes around the Lisboa Corner, and from then to the finish line, it's very, very difficult to pass. So if you're going to pass somebody, it's got to be that corner. So on the very last lap of the first heat, he's in the lead. He's a great guy with amazing car control, but he was looking in the mirror. I was all over him like a rash, to be honest, trying to pass him, and I just couldn't find a way past. But I just thought I'll brake as late as I can, and I'll try and pass him there. So looking in the mirror, I can see him everywhere, and he broke so late, and he managed to get his left rear wheel on the white line on the left as he was coming in, and he kind of lost control of the car, and it was then heading for the apex, which is a barrier on that corner, and there was nothing he could do. He was going to go head first into the barrier. So I'm directly behind him, and I saw my chance, so I dived down the inside of him and I pushed him straight. We bumped front and rear wheels, pushed him straight, took the lead, and now he's directly behind me, but we're both still going. So he chased me around the rest of the lap, and I won the heat. I did rather better than him in the second race, and I think overall he was probably third. I think Manuel Piro was second, and I won overall. So on the podium, he was like, "Oh, that was amazing. Thanks for that." I was going in the barrier. So we kind of got friendly, and it just so happened that Jaguar were looking for one more driver for their Le Mans program. So, I mean, somehow he obviously put my name in the hat, and I was invited to go to Paul Ricard for a test. And I went down there, and out of luck and whatever else, I managed to get the job. So it's just so weird, isn't it? So everything was going to stop, and then suddenly, because of this one race, I got the chance to race in sports car racing.
I've got a car to race in sports car racing as well. The car, when you think back at some of the Group C cars and the cars we all thought of, I've got a silk cut Jaguar artwork above my bed in our bedroom.
A bit like that one behind me, you mean?
Mine's just like the corner of the car. It's not quite as iconic as your picture. It's all my wife would let me have.
So that obviously you first Le Mans, Andy, first ever Le Mans, and you go and win it.
To be getting into for the first time.
Yeah, no, absolutely amazing. And even if you go back to that Paul Ricard test, you know, I'd never driven anything that went over 200 miles an hour before, and I'd never actually driven a closed.
What, just 200, just a measly 200.
Yeah, so I think it was 205 or something on the back straight Paul Ricard, but it's easily faster than I'd ever been before. And also, you know, just being in a very, very claustrophobic closed car. It's a different thing. It's hot. The car's heavier than you're used to. So, but Jan was on hand there, and he kind of steered me through. Listen, you're going to find this and this and this, and don't worry if it's weaving about. Just let it do it. You know, it's a little bit like towing a caravan in a crosswind. Just let it do it. You'll be fine. And he really helped me through the test. And at the end of the first part of the test, I was just being sort of evaluated for lap time, and the lap times were good. And then later on, once I think they decided I could do the job, they said, "Okay, well, we want to see whether you can do this lap after lap, because that's obviously what you're going to need to do in Le Mans." So they stuffed me in the car and fueled the car up to the top and said, "Right, we'll see you in an hour." And of course, I thought, right, well, I was doing my energy management and my brain power management to finish the end of that hour with every lap as fast as I could. And I got to the end of that hour thinking I've done quite well. Actually, the lap times were pretty consistent. I opened the door when I came in the pits, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, that's it now." No. So the fuel nozzle went back on, and they made me do another hour, by which time I was totally used up before I even left the pit lane. But it must have gone okay, because I was invited to the office on Monday morning and said, "Right," and then we sat down and said, "Right, okay, we want you in our team."
Where was the office?
In Kidlington, in Oxford.
That would have been Tom Walkinshaw's.
Tom Walkinshaw Racing, yeah. That's it. And then basically they were saying, "Right, okay, you've got no experience in sports car racing. We want you for Le Mans, but of course you can't just race in Le Mans. So we're going to send you to," I think Jerez was the first race in Spain. Then there was a race in Atlanta. And there was lots and lots of testing. And then, so Le Mans was obviously, it was the first time I'd been to Le Mans. There was no test day that year, but I had some experience in the sports car before. the
The
event.
team must have been like bit like a Formula One team, I'm assuming, because I know that like top sports car teams generally operate, don't they? They're very similar level to a Formula One team. So it must have been a big, big. I know when I joined Bentley, from doing single seaters and stuff, you arrive there and it's it's quite a big organisation. Obviously, lots of other drivers. So there's lots of things to figure out and fit in and understand how you kind of you place in the team and stuff. But to go to Le Mans, I mean, how was your first sort of taste of Le Mans then? Driving that.
Well, you're absolutely right too, and these races before I got there, you could already see how important sports car racing was, how professional it was, and how good all the top teams were. So that was a shock to begin with. And then you get to Le Mans thinking sports car racing, and then you realise that this is a whole new game.
Yeah.
The level of professionalism was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Then, because there was no test day, you're out onto the track, and of course there was no chicanes. 88 and 89, the chicanes hadn't been installed. So you set off down the straight. There's no speedo in the car in those days. You just had a tacho. And I was studying the gear chart before, and I spotted roughly where 200 miles an hour was. And I'm going down the straight my first couple of times down the straight, and I got to 200, and everything was whizzing past so quickly. And I thought, whoa, shit, this is really not cool. So you sit there, and of course you're a professional driver, and if that's the easiest part of the car to change, they always used to say, the driver's like on a bayonet fitting. If it's not working, you just throw it out and put another one in. So you've got to perform. So anyway, but your brain's telling you, yeah, just take it easy the first couple of laps. So I sat around 200 miles an hour, and about halfway down the straight, a Jaguar and a Mercedes passed me like I was tied to a post. And I thought, oh shit, that's going to be fast the next lap. So in course, you're young, you're in your 20s, so you've got a very small imagination. So the next time down the straight, you just pin it and you just sit there. And sure enough, we were approaching, it was interesting, we were, close to 250, I guess, but still in the 240s as a VMAX.
Wow.
But people were having a lot of tyres exploding, even in those days, and it was a lot to ask of a radial tyre. So although we were using radials the whole year, Dunlop was our tyre supplier, they would only allow us to run on cross-ply tyres.
For safety.
24 hours for safety, yeah. So a cross-ply tyre actually grows in diameter quite a lot at speed. So we were geared for 231, but with the growth, it was the upper side of 240s. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. And the other problem, of course, with a radial, if you have a puncture, generally the sidewall of the tyre is what actually lets go. And all right, it's probably a big stretch to say at 250 miles an hour you could control the car, but at least the main carcass of the tyre tries to stay on. But with a cross-ply tyre, if it fails, you basically have it starts to have a small problem, and then it unravels. So once the tyre's gone round once or twice, it's got a tail. And then, of course, and the rear wing was just above the venturi of the ground effect at the back. So after it's been round a couple of times, it whips the wing off, and then you're upside down. And that's in fact what happened to Win Percy in '87. He had a tyre failure, and then the car was upside down at 230 miles an hour.
Did you ever have any big shunts or big moments at Le Mans in all the years? Because obviously you've been there, a fair few times. Did you have any kind of scary moments?
Yeah, I did 21 starts, and I had a small one when I was with Toyota.
Yeah.
Which could continue, but I had a fairly large one in 2007 in the RML.
Entry to the Porsche curves.
Yes, yeah. Do you remember that one? Yeah, and it's really strange because.
I can't remember what happened. Would you hit the bump? Was it the bump or what was it that?
Yeah, it was a really, really strange thing. So we won the LMP2 in 2006, and the car was really flying in 2007 as well. And it was a situation where the safety car came out. It was damp, and then I can't remember exactly how it happened. I think I may have made a pit stop or whatever, and I was on a set of hot tyres out of the warmers, but behind the safety car. And of course, the temperature drops, and the pressure drops, and you lose ride height. And so when the safety car pulled off, it may have been I was behind the one that pulls off at Lisboa Corner. So I got going, and I went through Indianapolis and through Arnage, and I kind of felt like I had enough temperature. And you tend to get some, you get the lateral grip earlier than you get the longitudinal grip, I've noticed with these tyres. So it gave me the feeling that it was okay, but the pressures must have still been quite low. And when I arrived at the Porsche Cursor, you arrive down there in sixth gear, you pluck fifth, turn and go full throttle. It's almost, the only reason you just tap the brake is just to pull the gear.
Yeah.
So I sent it in wide open, went over the bump, and it just hit the bottom, right under the rear axle, and just pulled the back off the ground. So you're off the ground in a split second. You put the opposite lock on because you feel the back's gone. That's because you're not on the ground, and as soon as you land, it bites and sends you in the wall.
Oh.
And that's what happened. And the weird thing is, the barrier's a bit further away now than it used to be.
Yeah.
As soon as I realised what had happened, I looked at the barrier and it was coming towards me from the side. And I looked at it and I'm like, "Oh, this is the one." And I honestly thought I wasn't going to get away with this one.
Really?
And I kind of crouched as much as I could, and then it hit so hard. It's like unbelievable. And you have no idea what you're doing. I mean, I think I must have knocked myself out for some seconds or whatever, but I remember I sort of woke up in the car, and then I thought, right, well, I probably should get out of the car. So I took the steering wheel off, and then I thought, well, how can I get out of the car with the steering wheel on? So I put the steering wheel back on, and then I couldn't get out of the car because the steering wheel was on. So then I take the steering wheel off, and I did this like 3 or 4 times. And so I was so confused. And then they're talking to me on the radio, what's happening? And I'm talking, and I have no idea what I was doing. So they stuck a rope around the car and dragged it out of the way so that everything could continue. And they're telling me on the radio, don't leave the car, don't leave the car. Is it drivable? Is it drivable? And I was kind of looking around. The nose was gone, and the side pod was gone, and actually broke a front steering arm as well. So I only had one steering arm. And I was kind of beginning to kind of understand where I was. And I thought, well, yeah, it probably is drivable. So then I tried to drive it from the Porsche Cursor back to the pits. And I was driving around on the grass because it was easier to drive without a steering arm on the grass.
Yeah.
And then when I get to the pit entry, of course, I'm on the left coming up to the Ford chicane.
Yeah.
And the pit entry's on the right. Yeah. So I've got across the track. And as I'm going down, and I'm still a little bit confused, and then there's a marshal opposite in the pit lane, and he's like, no, because you can't. I lost the side pod on the mirror, so I had no right-hand mirror. So cars are arriving there at I don't know what speed. So I was going to go, and he's like, no, and then he's like, yes. So I start going across the track, and then about a third of the way across, he's like, no. So I thought, well, nothing I can do now. I've got to keep going and hope nobody hits me. And I kept on going, and everything missed me. It was fine. And I got into the pits, and then that was it. They set about repairing the car, but I was not very well.
I mean,
so, yeah.
I mean, you've had an amazing career. I mean, in terms of sports car stuff. I mean, it's an enviable career because I'm just looking here. Obviously, Le Mans win. 3 wins of Daytona 24 Hours, overall wins. 2 wins of Sebring. I mean, it's in terms of sports car racing. If any drivers kind of looks to be a professional sports car racer and say, well, yeah, first of all, I'd love to win Daytona. Sorry, I'd love to win Le Mans. But then to win Sebring and Daytona, I mean, there's not many drivers that have won all 3, and multiple times at that. So I mean, it's a hell of a career, really, isn't it? When you look back.
How do you go from that to DTM though? You got this super touring era that's alongside the Group C. In my head, as a kid, it was Group C cars, DTM cars, and super tourers, and somehow you kind of hopped from one to the other and did them all. You did the holy grail of iconic heyday motor racing. How did you go from sports cars to DTM?
Well, that kind of happened by accident because if you remember, Group C economy-wise wasn't looking good. So in 1990, at the end of '93, Group C pretty much died, and the regulations changed and prototypes were banned. So for '94, there were no prototypes. And so I was out of a drive, and just this drive popped up from almost nowhere. So that's how I ended up doing that one season. Mm-hmm. And then luckily later on, of course, it's weird with this whole prototype thing. And that's why I'm not a big fan of this hypercar thing that's going to happen now, because what I've seen in the past, and it's easy to repeat the mistakes of what's gone before. But you take a prototype car. Yes, they're really, really fast, but because you don't have to make a road-going version of that car, yes, it's expensive. Teams are always going to spend a lot of money, but relatively for the speed, it's pretty cost-effective. It's a racing car. If you ban prototypes and you used road-going cars, you've got all the expense of developing the road car, and you've got the expense of developing the evolution of the road car that can go racing. And if you want to change something, you've got to change the road car. And it just ends up being almost where you were, but for probably 2 or 3 times the money.
Yeah, which is absolutely the way that they don't need to be going. They need to be making it cheaper, don't they?
I think so, yeah. I mean, LMP2 at the moment is pretty competitive. There's lots of cars, and they're very spectacular. Yes, I guess you could involve more manufacturers perhaps if you try to go the hypercar route, but I don't know, it's a bit of a risk, and it's been done before. And also, in the end, what happens is you follow this supercar, GT, hypercar, whatever you want to call it, and nothing stands still, so you're always getting more and more performance. At what point, how do you define a prototype? What's the definition of a prototype? Because if you push that hypercar thing, or GT, or whatever you want to call it, as far as you can, you end up with something that's so removed from what it was supposed to be as a road car, it becomes almost a prototype.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit either category then, does it? It's not really somewhere in the middle.
It's somewhere in the middle. And so in the end, it's like, okay, well, if you just put a set of rules out and you don't have to worry about road regulation, these are the rules, go and build a car, it ends up cheaper. So I don't know, but I'm not clever enough to run a championship or make up the rules, but it just seems to me to be a backward step for the hypercar.
We're almost going to take what's worked well in GT3, aren't they? Because in GT3, that has worked, hasn't it? Having the manufacturers have come one after the other, and GT3 suddenly got this huge pack of manufacturers. But it's, as you say, it's that huge leap up to hypercar from just supercar level, which...
Yeah, the only thing I would say about GT3 is GT3 is all about privateer teams. And in the end, I know manufacturers come and go, and sports car racing's popularity ebbs and flows with the manufacturers. But what makes Le Mans is going to Le Mans, and you've got Audi and Bentley and Toyota and this. And the factories make the race, and the factories also spend the money on the publicity of the race, and it's a big deal. If you think about GT3, yes, the racing's good and there's a lot of competition. The cars are quite equal and, but it still can't beat, for me anyway, just personally, it can't beat a big punch up. I mean, those days when we had Audi, who was there? Audi, Porsche, Toyota.
Yeah.
And all those, that was absolutely spectacular.
Even before that, you had all the British about Bentley, MG, Morgan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's really, really fantastic. And so, look, if it was easy, everybody would make a success of all of this, but it's not easy. Of course, it's not.
And the problem is
with the world now, it's changing so fast.
It's become so expensive. I mean, if you look at the racing in America right now, I mean, the same season that we were racing in the American Le Mans series is it's probably double what it was when we were doing it. And for what? Because the cars aren't any better or any faster. And how can it be double the price or close to double the price? It doesn't make any sense how things have just become so expensive. And that's the problem is that motorsport connects to a certain level, people can afford to do it and people will come and go, but it reaches a point where it just becomes crazy, especially in the sort of the market and the environment that we're in currently. It doesn't make any sense, and that's the big problem I see in motorsport. It's just way too expensive for what the return is right currently.
Yeah, it's way too expensive. If you look at from the manufacturer's point of view, good reasons for doing it are the publicity side, the brand awareness side, and then also the technology side. So throughout history, things that have been developed on Le Mans cars end up on road cars quite soon afterwards, and it's much more connected to normal road cars than Formula One is.
Yeah.
An example of that, just when I drove for Audi, I drove at Le Mans for Audi in '99, and the early 2000s, I drove an Audi in the American Le Mans series.
Yeah.
And I did it for a couple of years. And the first year we had the old direct injection, port injected engine. And then later on they switched to the direct injected, which is one of the first, probably the first prototype car with a direct injection engine.
Yeah.
And the gains in torque and fuel economy and everything were amazing. And 18 months later, I bought an Audi A3 with a direct injected engine. And so you can see that it was a really
transfer
way of proving the technology. Yeah, in fact, as soon as Le Mans was won by that engine, the direct injection engine, you could buy it. It was in the showroom. So that, for manufacturers, that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
I think the reason that we've got trouble now is because we're right in the middle of switching to electrification. And so developing stuff that's not relevant to that is not interesting for manufacturing. That's why we've lost them.
Yeah. Do you think that's where we're going ultimately, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Probably hydrogen long term. I think it'd be hydrogen power long term, but I think short, medium term, it's going to be kind of hybrid. That's the way I see it.
Well, it depends how long you want this podcast, because I'm massively into electric cars. So, and one of the things that hydrogen's a great idea, and ultimately there will be a place for it. But as what I can see, perhaps trucks and perhaps boats, it might make sense.
Right.
But the biggest problem you've got with hydrogen, you take an amount of energy, and by the time you've got that hydrogen to do its work, you've already lost 70% of that energy.
Right.
So you do the same thing with electric and you've lost a very small amount, maybe 10%, maybe 15% at most. So it's inherently inefficient.
Right.
So even if you said, okay, we will manufacture the hydrogen using renewable energy, you're still going to need 3 times as much of renewable energy to run something on hydrogen as you are if you put it into a battery and run it in an electric car.
Yeah.
So I told you, sorry about this. This is going to be a long podcast. So if you look at that, yes, there's a place for it. And certainly, I mean, ships, you can put a massive hydrogen fuel cell on a ship.
Yeah.
And it would be a good thing. Because at the moment they're just burning dirty fuels, crossing the Atlantic. There's no rules.
Yeah,
in all the oceans, and it's a disaster because everywhere in the world's trying to help the planet, and then you've got these massive container ships crossing without regulation, pretty much. So that could be a good way of doing it, and the same with really, really heavy goods transport on roads. It might make sense, or some battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell combined. But I think for small passenger cars, the way things are going, and the economies of scale and the way the efficiency is increasing all the time, I can see. I mean, electric cars are amazing.
I mean,
how do you get the theatre though, Andy? We've lost the theatre. When you look at Formula E, I mean, some of the racing's fantastic, and some of the names that Formula E attracts, again, makes it, if you're a motorsport fan, if you're a nerd like I am, it's still pretty cool. But it has no theatre. It really doesn't, I don't think.
But you know,
I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, I'm not at the moment, I'm not a big fan of that. But you can see how many manufacturers are involved in it. Why? Because it fast tracks your development. And so if you've got all those manufacturers and all those top class drivers in a series, in the end, it's going to succeed in some form. Yeah. What I don't like is, at the moment, the cars are too slow. The tracks are appalling.
Yeah.
And so as a traditional race fan, you watch it and there's a massive thing missing from it. I suppose you can argue it's dragging in a new audience, a captive audience in the middle of the city centres where they're running these races, but it's not feeding the traditional enthusiast.
Yeah.
But does that mean that it'll always be like that? I don't know, because the next generation of car will have considerably more power. Presumably they'll have more energy, and these things start small, and perhaps eventually, with all the manufacturers putting their technology into it, it will go somewhere. But at the moment, yeah, if you sit down and watch an F1 race or Le Mans or a Formula E, it's a no-brainer.
See, we've all grown up with noisy engines, smell of Castrol, burning rubber, and that's what kind of excites us, and that's kind of what we've grown up with. But if you look at the kids today, they're more excited by the tech. So because they haven't grown up with it, if they've not really smelled Castrol and they've not heard the engines, if you've not heard it, you don't miss it. And what they get excited about is the technology, like with phones, with computers, and it's all about tech now. And, if these manufacturers can come up with some exciting cars that are really techy and, have got cool gadgets, and that seems to be what the kids or what the consumers are going to want going forward. And it's kind of bad in some respects, because you go to something like a Goodwood and you see all the old cars racing, and it's amazing. But unfortunately, 10, 15 years time, they're going to be, pretty far different to what the road cars are today.
I am thoroughly depressed now, so I need to know what it was like to drive that Alfa Romeo 155 DTM car, really.
You love that Alfa,
Bring us
don't
back
you?
from the brink.
You love that Alfa.
I love that car. I had a Tamiya model of it when I was a kid. I didn't realise I'd be speaking to the guy who actually drove it.
Well, you talk about the Jägermeister one.
Yes.
Okay, so the story you might not know then is that when I signed for the team, it was Schubel Motorsport team, and so they were running a couple of factory cars or new cars. I think it was Chris Nissen and Christian Dano were driving those two. So this was like in the top category, and then there was another category for year-old cars called the privateer class. Mm-hmm. So they ran two cars. The one I was driving was a white car, which was supposed to be sponsored by Fnac, and the whole deal fell through, so it ended up being a plain white car, and the Jägermeister car. So I always struggled in that white car all year. I couldn't get within a couple of seconds of the Jägermeister car, being driven by Michael Bartels, and I just couldn't get close to it. I absolutely couldn't, and so the sponsorship wasn't there. And in the end, by about July, they said to me, listen, we've got no money to run the car anymore, and we've got no money to pay you and whatever. So we're going to end up having to stop. But the last race of the year that I did was in Donington Park. It was probably the end of July or early August. And Michael Bartels couldn't do the race. So as a thank you for spending the whole year with the team, they said, look, you can drive the orange car at that race. And there were two events. I was first in one of them in the privateer class and second in the other one, having struggled all year.
And that'll explain why I couldn't find the damn car with the right side or with your name on it.
Exactly, yeah. Well, this is right. And so then, talking to Chris Nissen, he came to me and he said, oh, yeah. He said, we had those two cars as the factory cars all last year, and we could never figure out why the white one was 2 seconds slower than the orange one. It was the same all year, or whatever colour they were. And we never ever figured it out. And well, thanks for telling me now. So I was spending the whole first part of the year thinking I'd just forgotten how to drive. And in the end, that's what it was. So I'm pretty thankful to Schubel for allowing me to drive the orange one.
They must have been incredible cars, though. They must have been so wild.
They were brilliant because, for people who weren't familiar with the rules, but also from a driving side, they were 2.5 litre atmospheric engines and pretty much not very many rules, I should say. I think there had to be V6s, 2.5 litre V6 or whatever. So basically, they were close to 500 horsepower. So they were producing their power from RPM. So in the Alpha, you had a tacho, digital tacho, that had 2 pages. So on the first page, you from 0 to 7, and the second page was 7 to 14,000. If ever it went down onto the first page of the tacho, it wouldn't go anywhere, it wouldn't get out of his own way. You had to be on the second page. So it was all about RPM, and it was 4-wheel drive, and they were amazing to drive. But the rules in DTM in those days, if you might already remember this, but basically 2 100-kilometre races. The fuel tank was, from memory, 105 litres. So you went out in qualifying on a brand new set of tyres and an empty fuel tank, and then they sealed the fuel tank. You could fill it up for the race. They sealed the fuel tank, and you did the first race on your qualifying tyres with a full tank of fuel. After the 100-kilometre race, there was a 15-minute break, and then the second race, you could put another new set of tyres on. The fuel tank was still sealed, so you had half tank of fuel. So the second race was a completely different race. The car felt totally different. In that 15 minutes, you could do anything you want to the car, anything. And they waited till all the cars got back to the pit lane, siren went off, and for 15 minutes, you do what you like. So, of course, Mercedes, who we were battling against, they had in the garage, on a subframe, another engine. Radiators connected to the subframe. I guess they had a jerry can with a fuel pipe in it, and this engine's being revved up on its subframe in the garage. And as soon as that 15 minutes started, they go out with the air wrenches and they change engine.
Wow.
Unbelievable. So, I mean, DTM's always been fantastic, hasn't it? I mean, just it's a brilliant series. I know they're struggling a bit with manufacturers at the moment, but it's a brilliant series. But to see that, then we go back to our garage. There's the Alpha with a normal bonnet. Everything's all bolting well. There's not much we're going to change, boys. So basically, dip the oil, stick it on the grid. But that was what it was about. And the whole occasion, the number of fans that came to watch, and it was just unbelievable.
Oh, amazing!
So I really enjoyed it.
That's a real era of DC. As you say, they're impressive now. Steam at Brands Hatch and the lap times that they get around the Indy circuit at Brands Hatch is incredible. But yeah, just an era of touring cars.
One thing we've got to touch on, because obviously we've had Derek on the podcast, which was fantastic. And I mean, he talks very, very fondly about that Le Mans in '95, where obviously he drove with Justin and yourself, and you know, so close to having a win really with that one. But tell us a little bit about that one, about that race.
This is the Harris McLaren F1, isn't it?
It's what, sorry?
Yeah, that was.
It was what? Sorry, what did you say?
It's a Harrods car, this, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it was a Harrods car, and also because all of my experience was in prototype cars, it was, for me, it was quite, because it was designated as a GT1 car, wasn't it? So to go to a GT1, first of all, you've not got the car scraping along the ground, weighing less, with lots of downforce. You're in a GT car, which is a different kettle of fish altogether. So a very good GT car, as it happens, but still you need to adapt. So I was adapting early on to the car, but I really got into driving the car. But with quite low downforce, and that race in '95, it was really, really raining a lot. And you were skating over puddles, and you were on the lock stops a couple of times going down the straight, and you really had to have your wits about you. Unfortunately, because we led something like 10 hours of that race, but we had a clutch slave cylinder problem in the end. Nothing we could do about it. And were it a normal racing dog box, you could easily have changed gear. It was an H-pattern gearbox. You could easily have changed gear without the clutch. But unfortunately, it was a synchro mesh gearbox. And it was also a bit of a stubborn one at that. So it was quite possible to go, say, 6th to 5th or 5th to 4th, miss the gear, get stuck in neutral, and then not being able to get any other gear whatsoever. So it was too dangerous to try to do that. So once we had the problem, which was a couple of hours or 3 hours from the end, we then decided to do the rest of the race just in 5th and 6th. It was quite safe to go to 5th because it was just forward and you probably wouldn't get bulked into neutral. 5th and 6th. Yes, the V12 engine in the back was quite flexible, but you're going to lose a lot of time using 5th and 6th. So slowly we were passed by first one car, and then before the end another one, and we finished 3rd overall. So it was a race that got away. Having said that, you'll notice that in a 24-hour race, you'll have one team that wins, and you'll have quite a few teams that would have won if. So you don't count ones that got away. It got away, you didn't win, and bad luck. But it was one that got away.
They brought that car to Cadwell Park a few years ago, along with the P1 GTR, and they put them both in Harrods colour schemes. Were you brought down to drive that on that day? Because I know they had one of the drivers in. Yeah,
I did drive the P1 GTR at Silverstone in Harrods colours. Yeah, it was interesting to drive.
It's quite a cool shoot. I put a photo of it on our Instagram actually from the roof of the F1 the other day, and it looked good.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool.
And then of course, Andy, you know, you spent a lot of time, obviously, like I did at Dyson Racing. You know, I think it's been a great home for all of us. I mean, we all have only fond memories driving for the governor. I mean, you know, what a team, and of course, racing in America is you know, so much fun, isn't it? You know, I think I don't know about yourself, but I think we all look back and, you know, the American Le Mans series, what a great series it was, and great circuits. You know, probably certainly for me, definitely a highlight of my career, that period of time racing in America. But I mean, obviously, you know, you had a great relationship with obviously with James Weaver and Butch Leitzinger. I mean, you know, how was it driving with those guys? I mean, a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, no, you're absolutely right too. When you look back, I have only fond memories of driving for Dyson Racing, and Rob Dyson was a fantastic guy to drive for. And I guess when you look back on it, you realise just how lucky you were to drive for such a fantastic team, such a great atmosphere, and everybody wanted to win. If you drove for Rob, you always were given a car that was capable of winning. The series was really competitive. There were some great years. Driving with James and Butch and yourself, of course, we had a lot of fun. We had to sometimes pretend we weren't having fun because it's a serious business. But obviously in the car, you did a fantastic professional job. But outside of the car, I mean, we had some wonderful times. It was brilliant racing in America. And going backwards across the Atlantic, backwards and forwards every week as well. And that was great.
Yeah. I wanted to add a question. Did you once in Le Mans, I've got this my bit of paper somewhere, when you were at Le Mans, I think maybe with Perry McCarthy, did you once try and buy a car on a credit card?
That's another story from another podcast, which gets me
Okay.
into some other trouble. So
Okay.
let's not touch that.
Okay, we'll go that one then. we'll stay away from that one then.
But the short answer is yes.
I think at this point we've heard so many great stories from the starting with the Chiron and the high speed record, to the racing and the DTM car, which I really want to hear about. And we had a couple of questions actually on Twitter. I don't know if you saw them, Guy. Andy Marston, he works for Bentley Motorsport, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He does a lot of their test driving and.
Both know Andy.
Yeah.
So he said that you've done a couple of road car high speed runners, notably at that point the McLaren F1 in '98 and now the Chiron Supersport. How does that compare to racing? You've kind of given it the kind of visceral feel for how it compares, but actually now in your career, how does it compare? You still have that competitive fight when you go out there to do a speed record? Have you still got? How does it compare?
Well, of course it doesn't compare, because when you're racing as a professional driver, you're there, you're working for the team, you're working for yourself too, but primarily you're working for the team. Everybody in the race is working for the same thing. It's very intense. Before the race, you've no idea what's going to happen at the first corner. Anything can happen at any stage, and it's incredibly, intense. It's your whole life. So when you do a record attempt, you're not racing against anybody else. You're racing against the clock, the speed gun, if you like. But having said that, all of the experience of racing for more than 30 years as a professional driver didn't go to waste. You learn an awful lot of things, and you apply yourself, or I certainly did, you apply yourself to the job. So if the job is, can you drive for us and try and win Daytona or try and win Le Mans, that's one thing. But if somebody says, right, can you come and do this speed run for us? You just use all the tools in your toolbox that you used. And you're not racing down in the first corner and trying to get ahead, but you're at the same time, you're doing a very serious job. And when the world speed record was 200 miles an hour, was one thing, but now we're talking about incredibly high speed. So we're talking about quite a serious job. So your focus, I just put myself in the same position I would have done in any other professional driving job. That's what you need to do, and you're gathering data for the engineers too, and you're trying to give some feedback. And I retired from professional racing a while ago, but you never forget how to ride a bike, do you? So it all comes flooding back, and you try to do the best job you can.
You've driven in some of the eras when there were big tyre wars, and you used to do tyre tests, and they were actually big news. The tyre tests were almost as big news as they launched new cars and stuff. Is it similar to that, where you're testing is some comparisons to be made there?
What I used to like was the fact that we used to go testing, never mind tyre testing.
Yeah.
We used to do a lot of testing, and it was great. And perhaps we sort of grew up with that, and in the end we relied on that. Whereas nowadays, a lot of people do stuff on sim, and then when they jump in the car, they already know what they're doing. We never used to do any of that. It didn't exist. So everything we did was information in the bank, if you like. So if you went and did I used to love the tyre test, but I also like the chassis tests, where the guys had found a couple of things we want to try. They found something in the wind tunnel. They did something on the geometry, and you go and you do a back-to-back test to check that these things were actually better. And I used to really enjoy that side of it. And you had to be a very analytical driver. You had to be very consistent to deliver the real result, because nobody wants to put a part on the car which you think is quicker and actually it's not. And you basically shoot yourself in the foot. So you have to be absolutely sure. So I used to love that. The tyre testing stuff was interesting. So if you had a contract with a top tyre manufacturer, you'd go to the track, and then the next year or the beginning of the year, perhaps we'd go to Sebring in sort of January, February time, and they come with the latest tyres. And you put them on the car, and the car would go a second and a half faster on this tyre, at least. And it was amazing what they'd done over the winter. But then every year they came with a second and a half quicker. So does that mean that in 20 years, we're now 30 seconds a lap quicker? Do you know, it's weird. There's so much progress on tyres.
Andy, we're talking about testing. We can't not talk about motorsport, because it's just, we just can't. So obviously, I'll I'll let you tell us about it. I mean, it's quite an infamous story in the Dyson camp. You know, I remember when I joined Dyson and I went to Mosport, and they were like, well, we came here testing once, and Andy had this massive crash, and he went upside down on his roll hoop for so many meters, and I actually saw the pictures of the car, which looks horrendous. But perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what happened.
Right, so Dyson Racing rock up to Mosport. It was probably March time, perhaps even maybe early April, maybe at the latest. So we've got 2 cars, private test, exclusive use of the track. And I was driving the number 20 car with Chris Dyson, and the 16 was there as well. Who was driving the 16? Were you there, Guy?
No, right. It must have been Butch and James.
Butch and James would have been driving it, yes. So Chris was going to go out in the car first in the morning, and then he had to change his flight or something. And he said, listen, mate, I'm going to go and book some flights. You can go first in the car. So I was like, okay. So I go out in the morning and I do a couple of laps. You obviously, you do a rollout lap. You come back, check for leaks. Then you go out again. You readjust the ride heights and things like this. So, but during the winter, there's a famous hump that you go over at the end of the back straight, before turn 8. So you go flying's the wrong word to use. So you go very fast over the hump, and then you've got this fast right-hand corner at the end. And we all know the track really well. The straight is actually not straight. So it kind of meanders, and you've got grass either side and a wall either side. So on my preliminary lap, I felt, going over the jump or over the hump, I felt a bit of a tap under the car, which I thought, well, that's not brilliant. So anyway, I came to the pits, checked the ride heights, everything was fine. So I went out and did another lap, and sure enough, I always went over the brow of the hill in the same place, as we all do. I went over the brow of the hill, and I felt this bump under the car again. So then in my tiny little mind, I figured out, well, that's quite dangerous, that bump. Next lap, I'll move half a metre to the right and I'll miss the bump. So on the next lap, I'm flying down the straight, I get to the same point, and I missed the bump, but I caught the bump's big brother, which was half a metre to the right. And that was it then. It was story over. I mean, I just felt that it hit the bottom, the car lifted up 5 or 10 millimetres, boom, and then it was in the air, flying. And you're flat out in top gear, in an open top LMP2 car, flying upside down. And I'd seen quite a lot of, Alan McNish did it in Road Atlanta. I did it in Portland, Le Mans with Mark Webber and Peter Dumbreck. Yes. And usually when the cars fly, they tend to fly all the way over, and perhaps land on the wheels or the gearbox. But in this case, whether because we had more downforce on or what, because Mosport is a very fast track with a lot of high-speed corners, so you run a lot of downforce. The car didn't do that. It went completely, fully upside down, with the gearbox going in the direction of travel before takeoff. And we paced it out, and it was 202 meters we paced out before it first landed. And the thing is, with an open top car, if you come back down on a hard surface, you've got a pretty good chance of being okay. Each side of the straight, and the straight's meandering, each side of the straight is these grass areas. And if you come down on the grass upside down, you're done. So you're up in the air. I was always told that you never ever give up in an accident. You can always do something. So you're in the air and you find yourself still steering, still pressing the pedals, and nothing's making any difference.
Did you lift?
I think I did after a while, because it was deafening the way the engine was still wide open. And then you just sit there and you think, oh shit. And you're looking through the thing, and you can see the track's quite narrow from that high, and you basically just have to wait. I mean, you need to grab a hold of the belts to try and keep your arms in, and you just wait and just hope you come down on the flat bit. And so, and it did a couple of times, bang, bang, bang. Then it's scraping along the ground upside down, bits are flying off. And then once it got to turn 8, it hit the grass with the roll hoop, flicked itself back over onto the wheels. And so then at that point, I thought, well, it's all finished. So that was lucky. I undid the seatbelt. And then I realised I'm still going quite fast towards the guardrail. And I'm trying to put the seatbelt back on, but I can't. And then it stopped in the gravel trap. And then it was okay. So my immediate reaction was, James was in the other car. And you can hear it coming. And I'm thinking, shit, he's going to do the same thing. So I jumped out of the wreckage and I'm running towards stupidly trying to run 200 meters, and I'm running towards, and I realized I'm not going to make it. So I went back to the car and hid in the wreckage, hoping that he would miss me. But he saw all the bits of bodywork off everywhere, and he slowed down before the jump, and it was all okay.
Horrendous.
So yeah, it was quite a horrendous time. And then, of course, you need to get in the other car straight away, just for your head. So later in the afternoon, I drove the other car. But
oh wow.
Yeah, and I didn't do. I mean, we've all done some damage to the government's cars, but we tend not to do that much damage. But that day, I think I did quite a bit of damage, unfortunately. So I really apologise to the government listening to this.
Jonathan Tuckwell has asked us on Twitter, you've raced in all the big races, Andy, driving incredible cars from the Jaguar Group C to, of course, the Speed 8. What has been your most memorable race and why? That's a horrible question for a racing driver like you. You've got so many.
Yeah, and if I was like 20 years younger, I could probably answer the question quite easily. But there are so many races that pop up in your mind that were amazing races. And some of the most amazing races you ever did as a driver are not necessarily the ones that you won, but you knew that you did a fantastic job and you were really an integral part of the result, whatever result it was. But having said all that, winning Le Mans doesn't ever do your career any harm whatsoever. And in fact, winning any 24-hour race doesn't hurt either. So those races kind of stick in my mind. But I don't know, if you said pick your top 50 races, I might be able to do that. But to pick one is almost impossible, unfortunately. So
it's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, well, it is. It is a nice problem to have. But no, there have been so many.
Favourite car? You're a car buff. We can tell that. You're a petrol head. Favourite car?
Yeah, I mean,
which one would you like in your garage? If you could have one in the spotlight.
Toyota Prius, isn't he?
No.
Nissan Leaf.
Well, in terms of race car, generally what happens is the regulations keep changing. And so they change because the cars get too fast. So the one car that will stick in my mind for a very long time, the Toyota TS010. So this was in the early 90s.
Yeah.
What had happened at the end, 1990, at the end of that was the last Group C race with the 900 kilo turbocharged cars on a fuel consumption formula. And then the new category started, still called Group C1. And those cars were 750 kilos, still full ground effects, and then 3.5 litre V10 F1 engines. So what happened is during the winter time, so you'd lost 150 kilos, and then the aerodynamicists have been working on the car, so you had even more downforce. So you then ended up with cars with, I mean, they could pull 5G in the corners. They were just unbelievable cars to drive. And the Toyota was a great car. Unfortunately, Peugeot built a slightly better one and duffed us up pretty much every race. But driving that car sticks in my mind. What an amazing car. Particularly, of course, in the high-speed corners, it had loads of grip, it had loads of downforce. But even the medium-speed corners, you could go so much faster than anything you'd ever driven in the medium-speed corners. It just had so much grip. Incredible car.
Do you own any of your old race cars?
No, I don't. I mean, it'd be something that would be nice to do, but...
Which one would you pick to own, to have under lights?
That's another one of those difficult questions.
It's got to be the Le Mans car because it's got to be the most valuable.
Yeah, that's right. It depends what you're keeping it for. Yeah,
exactly.
Nice to have a silk cut Jag sat there under some spotlights in the garage, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yes, it would. Yeah, it would. Yeah, it's another one of those questions. I'm not doing very well on these questions, am I?
We've got some quick fire questions.
Let's do this. Let's do this. So, Andy, I've just got some quick fire questions for you. So, you just basically got to say the first thing that comes into your mind. Top Gear or Grand Tour?
I haven't got Amazon.
Top Gear then? Okay. Daytona or Sebring?
Daytona or Sebring?
Yeah.
Oh, blimey. What I used to like about Sebring was that you didn't lose a night's sleep. However, 12 hours pounding around there is like 24 hours anywhere else.
True.
So I still haven't answered the question, but I might be giving you some flavour.
So you like them both for different reasons, basically?
Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
Okay. Beach holiday or adventure holiday?
I think beach, because you can just relax after all that running about.
That's true. That's true. Dogs or cats?
Probably cats, actually. But I haven't got either.
Really? That's an upset.
That's quite seismic, that.
Huh?
That's quite seismic in the spinning wheels world.
Exactly. So we've had 20. We've had 20.
You're gonna break Twitter with that one, Andy.
We've had 20 guests, and the answer has been 9. Was it? No, sorry. 18 times has been dogs, and twice has been cats. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Was it 19 times?
No, 19 times dogs, because we actually put some pressure on the last cat.
Yeah, Brian Gush said cats. So we thought if you're going to be a successful racing driver, you had to like dogs, but you've just blown that one out of the water. So
well,
controversial.
I don't dislike dogs, and I've got neither. But
no, it's the first answer that counts.
That's okay. Oversteer or understeer?
I mean, if somebody's filming it, it'd have to be oversteer, wouldn't it?
I'd have you down as an understeer man, though. Your style.
Yeah.
Very
well,
smooth.
I am. Yeah, I much prefer that because I know what I'm doing. But I think, unfortunately, the way cars have evolved, an understeering car isn't as fast as an oversteering one.
That's true.
So,
Jaguar or Bugatti?
I'll tell you what, I'm blown away by the Bugatti, so I would have to say that.
They're your employer right now, so say Bugatti, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, but also, I mean, nothing can accelerate like one of those. And
to be fair, he opened up with that same line, guy, so we'll give him that.
Yeah, exactly. Last one, so V6 or V8?
If the V6 was attached to an electric motor, I'd go with that.
Oh dear, I thought you were going to say a DTM car.
I can't believe you've turned all tree hugger on us, Andy. I can't believe it.
I'll tell you what, it doesn't have to be about that. It's just about how really cool it is to drive some of these cars. But having said that, nothing compares with having 1,500 horsepower behind you and driving something like that. All I'm meaning by when I say this is that it's scary when you think about all of the stuff we've driven is perhaps disappearing slowly and we're going to go electric. But in the end, there's nothing to worry about because all the cars that the top manufacturers make are going to be really exciting to drive, whatever powers them. So
different experience, but still with the same exhilaration.
What's been really nice
because it's going to rip your head off on the acceleration.
Yeah.
What's been really nice about this one for me, guys? A lot of the time, I'm having to stop the story to say, actually, tell us what that felt like. But Andy, you really have a way of telling them that. It gives that visceral experience, especially with talking about the DTM car that I was really excited to hear about. I do feel like I know what it was like to be inside one. So thank you for that. I've never been in these cars. I haven't headed towards these barriers and looked at the sky, looked at the track, looked at the sky, looked at the track. But sometimes it's nice to hear about it and feel like you could be there just for that moment.
Exactly.
Well, it's great. Well, no, it's really nice to talk to you guys anyway. It's been fun.
I've got one last thing. I've got one last question for you. So I've got a pass-along question from Mike Nicholson. And he said, rally drivers or racing drivers, who are the most talented and why?
Of course, I would be biased because all my stuff was done on a track. But I have to tell you that I've been standing in the Welsh forests watching the top guys in WRC come through the forest, and you have to take your hat off to them. And you could also say the same thing about the MotoGP guys.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you, actually.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
What those guys do.
Yeah. So Andy, have you got a pass-on question for our next guest? It can be anything. It can be anything. Literally anything.
So who is the next guest? Do you know yet?
I don't know yet.
That's half the fun.
Right. Oh, it's half the fun. Okay. All right. What is the most stupid thing you ever did in a racing car?
Right. Fair enough.
Right.
What's the most stupid thing you've ever done in a racing car?
Oh, blimey! Now that's another new podcast complete. So.
All right, we'll leave that one. That's great. Well, that's great, Andy. Thank you for coming on. We've really enjoyed it. It's been great to catch up. I mean, like you said, we could probably talk for another 2 hours. But it's been great to catch up with you. And said a lot of respect for everything you've done in your career so far. I mean, it's just been you've had such an amazing career, and continuing to sort of set records now with Bugatti, and which is fantastic to see. And hats off to you for that. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. We need to get a beer sometime as well.
Definitely.